There are times in life when something is so catastrophically wrong that you have to take action. You can't sit back. I'm Kevin. I'm 25, and I'm an internet marketing specialist. One of those times was when my girlfriend, Kelly, 23, introduced me as her roommate to some guy she knew. The next thing I said, almost on an impulse, completely ruined her night, but maybe it saved our relationship. Before I begin, I'm telling this story with the channel. We are the music makers. No, they don't use much music, and they're not producing any, but we all make some music in our lives, and the music you make affects the people around you. This channel shows the kind of music couples play between themselves and how that affects the dynamic. But they're always focused on hope, meaningfulness, and joy in the end. If you like these stories, please like and subscribe so they can keep telling the stories that usually don't end up getting told. Like I said, I'm an internet marketing specialist for a publishing company. I design the ads, I put books and stories on digital platforms, and I work on bundles of ebooks to maximize sales and profit for the company. I had met Kelly at a friend's party, just maybe 8 people or so, most of them already couples. I think both of us were embarrassed at constantly feeling like fifth wheels in every conversation. So when we finally met in the kitchen, I could see her shoulders relax when she found out I was actually single, too. We talked about our hobbies, and she surprised me that she liked classic movies like I did. When I mentioned Seven Samurai, her eyes lit up. Yes, she gushed. I've never seen a movie with so much atmosphere in all my life. That scene where the one with the fake documents is shot and kills the bandit chief with his last breaths is one of the most heroic moments I've ever seen. She asked me if I had seen Rashomon. I hadn't, but I had seen Yojimbo. We talked about other foreign directors. I had seen The Seventh Seal. She had taken in a fistful of dollars. I hadn't taken in anything by Sergio Leone, but I did enjoy sword and sandal flicks. I had seen some old Hercules and Maciste movies, and she laughed. Some of those are so bad. Yes, I admitted, some of them are terrible, but I stand by anything with Steve Reeves. She shook her head. American Bodybuilder, went over and acted in that peplum stuff. He was a force of personality but never made it as an actor in the U.S. She nodded, interested. There's just a bottomless wealth of films to watch, I guess, she offered. I nodded, and if you don't mind wading through lots of mediocrity, sometimes there's a hidden gem. She smiled. Yes, there's a sad little movie that's actually kind of fun. It's a Turkish movie called Karate Girl. Ridiculous in every way, but so much fun. I'd heard about it. Is that the one with the worst death scene of all time? Yes. She let out a laugh. When the girl shoots one of the bad guys and he's running around screaming, it's so stupid, but it's the best movie ending ever. We each had a beer and laughed and talked for a while, and then she got quiet. You should know, I was in a serious relationship with a guy, Jeff. He was very sweet, but I kind of got bored. He was reliable, and he didn't make me feel jealous, but I lost the excitement. Why do you think that was? I tried to frame the question neutrally, but it was a probe. I wanted to see what she pinned the problem on. I needed to know if she had gained any perspective, since the relationship was clearly over. She leaned on the kitchen island. I heard this somewhere, and I realized it was describing me. When I was dating guys who didn't take me seriously, I was treating them like a slot machine. If a guy texted me after 3 days of silence, the little burst of energy I got was the only thing I noticed. I thought it was attraction, but it was really just a win mechanism. The previous boyfriends knew that if they left me alone for a couple of days, left me on read, I would come back with a stronger response. She sighed. I was full of energy, but it was always tension. With Jeff, the tension was gone, but because he was reliable, I had to learn to grow in the affection rather than interpret the slot machine buzz as attraction. She took a swig of her beer. I wish I had known that before I told Jeff I wasn't into him. She shook her head. I never built anything. I never got emotionally invested. She looked at me. That's why it ended. I kept waiting for the excitement, but I never threw myself into growing with him. Now it's a year later, and I'm still single. That was a response that I wasn't expecting, but it felt like she had put thought into her past and had decided that she needed to be invested. Something in me recalibrated, as if I was ready to buy in. Take a risk. She wasn't just pretty, we both liked movies. She had a sense of humor, and she realized something about herself. She seemed less like the only single girl, and I had to entertain her. and more like a woman who I had to know. After a moment, I said, there's a Jimmy Stewart film series coming up. 4 of his most famous films, Harvey, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Vertigo, and It's a Wonderful Life. It's kind of a whole evening thing, but I've been playing around with the idea of going. If I bought tickets, would you go with me? She stared at me for a minute. I think there was a moment of surprise, but then a smile spread across her face. That sounds great. She paused. I'm not normally a huge fan of Jimmy Stewart, but seeing those 4 films, all the films I'm supposed to see at least, would give me some film school cred. She laughed. Sure, sounds like a blast. We exchanged numbers, and from there we kind of went different directions at the party. We kind of had a time where the guys hung out on the porch and the girls were in the living room. But when there was a small reset, Jessica approached me. We had known each other since high school, never really close, but since she was engaged, she had allowed herself to be friendly with others in the group, and I guess that included me. I saw you with Kelly a while ago. Yeah, I responded. I didn't really know where she was going with this. She's nice, but I think she has some regrets. I nodded and said, I gathered. Jessica smiled a little. If you're interested, I think you'll be the first guy she'll let past her defenses. She struggled pretty hard when she realized what she did to her fiancé. She glanced out to the living room, catching a glimpse. When Jeff wouldn't take her back, wouldn't even look at her, she took it badly. And she's been on her own, just out of shock. I think you'd like each other. She then smiled softly. I nodded again, trying to keep a stoic demeanor. Maybe. I didn't know that Kelly had already confided to Jessica that I had asked her out. Looking back on it, I think Kelly was doing an informal background check. But at the time it felt a little out of nowhere, but it was also encouraging, as if I was getting the thumbs up to get to know Kelly. We started texting, and from the beginning it just felt natural. After the first day we began texting old movie quotes back and forth, and it always kept things light. She'd send over, get 3 coffins ready, and I'd text back, frankly, my dear, I don't. Then she sent a laughing emoji. Coincidence, or are you communicating something deeper? I thought about it, then I sent back, def coincidence. Then I got back a smiling emoji. The next day I sent an image of 2 tickets to the Jimmy Stewart Marathon. She sent back a gif of yes, 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 from When Harry Met Sally. That was an interesting response, but I didn't want to infer too much, so I only responded. Do 80s movies qualify as classics? She responded with a blushing emoji, but then wrote, if it's from before we were born, it's classic. Wait, you're saying Armageddon is a classic movie? And Titanic? I added an eye roll emoji. There was a short pause. Don't read too much into it. Then there was a pause. Fine, what's your definition? I hadn't thought much about it, but after a moment I thought, well, I guess it's more of a coloration issue. By the end of the 70s, color films looked clean and lost that brown hue that earlier stuff seemed to always show, like a hint of grime. And BBDU always counts as classic. There was a pause. Agree to disagree, she wrote back. I sent back a smiling emoji and of course. And then, just because we might disagree on what counts as classic doesn't mean we can't watch stuff. I'll watch Independence Day or Back to the Future if you want. There was a long time before she responded. That was normal. We both had lives and work, and she had been pretty good at responding in the evening. I'm looking forward to this Jimmy Stewart thing, Kevin. Me too, I shot back. We then made specific plans for me to pick her up. On the Friday night of the screening, I picked her up. I was wearing a light jacket. They'll have food, and since it'll be 6 hours, we'll need to eat during the intermission. But I did bring something better. I opened my jacket, and there were 2 Ghirardelli chocolate bars. She grinned at me. You're an outlaw, but those should go in my purse so they don't get soft. I pulled out the bars and handed them over. She opened her purse, depositing them. If you forget about them, I'm not going to give them back, she remarked with a knowing grin. I won't, I chuckled. She told me she had watched some of Jimmy Stewart's westerns and some comedy called It's a Wonderful World. World? I asked, glancing her way. She chuckled and then shrugged. Yeah, weird coincidence, right? Let's just say it's a little too screwy to be one of his best films. Stewart's not really at his best when he's a tough guy. I smiled a bit. I'm glad you're not spoiling the 4 movies. I think organic reactions will be much better. She chuckled. Have you seen It's a Wonderful Life? I nodded. Yeah, it's basically going nonstop every Christmas, she considered. What do you know about the others? I shrugged. Harvey is a bit of a whimsical comedy, I think. Vertigo is this Hitchcock thriller, I thought hard. I might sit parts of that out. The plot comes off as deeply uncomfortable and unsettling, and if it's as painful as I've heard, I'll probably go out into the lobby for the second hour. She looked at me. Perhaps there was surprise in her eyes, but she nodded. Soon we were in my car, going to the theater. The festival was starting with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I, of course, bought popcorn and sodas for ourselves. The movie was very well made, but there was a sense that the machine was closing around the main character. When it was over, I could hear everyone whispering back and forth. Kelly tapped my hand. What did you think? I smiled at her. Oh, it was fine, but I think I can see why it really didn't stand the test of time. Jimmy Stewart's character kind of felt like a dupe. She looked at me, nodded. Yeah, I guess he kind of did. We walked through the lobby together. And when I looked at the listings and saw Vertigo was the next movie, Kelly asked if I wanted to sit it out. I shook my head. No, I'll watch as long as I think it worth the viewing. If I get too uncomfortable, I'll step out. I certainly don't want to ruin your experience. She smiled and squeezed my arm. A few minutes later, the lobby lights went up and down a few times. The PA system announced that the next movie would begin in 5 minutes. Kelly said she'd need to use the bathroom, and I found a bench to wait for her as she went in. When she came back, she seemed more confident. She held her hand out to me, and I took it. We strolled into the theater, found our seats, and soon enough the haunting music rose. This was a Jimmy Stewart who was darker, a little unhinged, emotionally unsure. I disliked it from the beginning, and it never got better. After the initial death scene, and then the scenes where Stewart was making the girl dress and color her hair, I had had enough. I apologized to Kelly, stood up, and walked out of the theater. I looked around, and there was a makeshift bar, and I stood there with a plastic stem glass of white wine. 10 minutes later, I was surprised when I saw Kelly come out of the theater. She blinked, looked around, found me, and walked my way. A minute later, she was in arm's reach of me. Buy a girl a drink, I could go for what you're having. I looked at the bartender, nodded, and a moment later, she was holding her own plastic glass of wine. You didn't have to come out here, I said. I know, she said. I wanted you to be able to enjoy the movie, even if it was going in a direction I couldn't appreciate. I know, she agreed. I don't want you to think you have to follow me around. I can handle myself. I know, she stated firmly. I stared at her, confused. Then why did you come out? She took a sip of her wine, and her eyes never left my own. Then she said, I realized that I wasn't really enjoying the movie either. And I realized that I wanted to be with you more than I wanted to sit there and watch something I didn't really like. I stared at her for a moment. She looked back at me. As our eyes met, all I could say was, that was the kindest, most wonderful thing any woman has ever said to me. She reached up and put her hand on my chest. It sounds like you've been living in a state of romantic deprivation. I smiled a little and said back to her, I prefer to call it stoic patience. I think you should call it never being picked. That ends tonight. She pulled on my shirt right below the collar, and when leaned slightly, she reached up and kissed me. That came as a complete surprise. But after 5 seconds, she pulled away slightly and asked, Are you going to kiss me back, or what? I wrapped my arms around her, still holding my glass of wine, and we kissed right in front of that bartender. He didn't seem to care, but when our lips parted, she was smiling. Then we both looked over at him. Gin and tonic, for both of you, on the house. We just laughed, and the heaviness that seemed to follow me around seemed to disappear. I put a 20 in the tip glass, and we took our drinks to a set of chairs on the side of the lobby. We had maybe 45 minutes to kill before the movie came to an end. In the glow of that sudden kiss, I felt the need to share with her. We talked about college experiences, how we had gotten into movies in different ways. My grandfather would take me fishing, but the night before we would inspect the fishing gear to the flying leathernecks and patent. She had started watching movies like Goldfinger and Gone with the Wind because they had been put on after Disney classics. And everyone in the room just kept watching. She hadn't watched many war movies, and I had specific opinions about James Bond. Roger Moore is a better Bond than Sean Connery, I said. Bold opinion, Kelly retorted. Defend it. The Man with the Golden Gun and Moonraker are better movies, and they are more fun to watch. Dr. No is the first, and it gets better as it goes along, but they were figuring things out. And Diamonds Are Forever clearly wasn't written for Connery. They brought him back because George Lazenby refused to return to the role. She nodded and smiled. Fair. I don't think it'll convince a lot of people. I've seen every James Bond movie up to the 1990s. Here's the real question. What do you think of Lazenby? I thought for a bit. Biggest missed opportunity, I responded. Lazenby only had that one film, but it felt like he was going to grow into that role. When he's holding Tracy at the end in his arms after the wedding, telling the policeman that she's just resting. I think it's the most poignant moment in the whole series. I shook my head. Imagine if it was Lazenby in Moonraker or Octopussy. He'd have a half-dozen films under his belt, and history would be having the conversation, Connery or Lazenby. She was silent for a minute. I never thought of it that way. She sipped her drink. When Bond wiped the tears from Tracy's eyes after she demands her father tell Bond what he needed to know really was a tender moment. She looked at me, then reached for my hand. I'm glad we went to this marathon, even if we are sitting out, not watching most of Vertigo. We got to talking about our past relationships. Mine was made up of a few college girlfriends and a few dates since. I had had a serious boyfriend until about 6 months ago, she admitted. She glanced at me, maybe expecting me to change the subject or go in a different direction. I remained silent. She sighed. Jeff was a good guy. Her eyes flicked back and forth between her drink and me, like the best. But after 6 months, I hadn't come to terms with the quiet of the relationship. He wasn't mysterious or adventurous or spontaneous. He was just Jeff. He went to work every day. He ran errands. He included me in his life. But even though he made my life light, he didn't make it exciting. I'd suggest a night on the town, and he didn't want to spend the $1,000. I'd ask to take a trip to somewhere like Thailand or São Paulo. He'd shake his head and offer to go to Miami or Yellowstone. She looked down at her wine again. He offered good things, but I realize now that I never appreciated what he had to offer. She laughed a little. I finally told him he was too boring for me. I wanted adventure. But the day after we broke up, I looked at my bank account, realized I was barely going to make rent, and it occurred to me all at once that I wasn't even going to be able to travel to Washington, D.C. or Nashville. She shook her head. I had to wait until he was gone before I appreciated that he was building a life, and all I wanted was the excitement of the moment. She reached out and took my hand. I thought for a long time, then offered what I felt was a fair warning. I think you should be aware that my life sounds pretty similar to what Jeff was building. She looked over at me. Then she laughed at herself again. Jeff prioritized my comfort first. He made sure I got the first and last bite of every appetizer. He kept a sheet on the passenger's seat of his car, so it would be clean when he'd remove it and I'd sit down. He'd have a bottle of water in the car when we'd drive for more than an hour. She shook her head. That's the kind of man that I threw away. If you're suggesting that you'll be something like that, sign me up. Suddenly Jeff seemed like a remarkably high standard to meet, almost too high. Kelly must have realized my concern. I'm not asking you to do all the things that Jeff did. You're not the same man, and he wasn't perfect. But he was good, and he wanted me to be happy. If you can do that, you'll never hear me ask you to go to Casablanca or Bali. A few minutes later, the doors opened from the theater. Vertigo had wrapped up. I grinned as others streamed out into the lobby. It looks like we have a 7-foot-tall invisible rabbit in our future. Kelly laughed. If that sentence had been said anywhere else, I'd have thought the speaker was insane. But I think you're right, Kevin. We went back into the theater, and when the lights went out, I leaned over and whispered, "Chocolate." Kelly blanked and then remembered. She pulled out one of the bars, handed it over to me, and I quietly unwrapped it. I handed over half, and we began eating it, bit by bit. I could tell she was eating it quickly, so when she had finished her half, I handed her the last row of mine. She tried to wave it off, but I pressed it into her hand. She looked down at it, then at me, and smiled. Once she finished it, she reached over and took my hand. The rest of the marathon was a blur of rabbit hijinks and Christmas nostalgia, and sooner than I expected the lights went up, and the whole thing was over. The screen said, "Next month, Humphrey Bogart." Kelly poked my ribs. Maybe, I agreed. Soon enough we were in the car. I had a really great time, Kevin. I did too, I responded. It's nice to have someone who appreciates the romance of slipping out from a movie that doesn't really hold up and sharing the time together. We went for late-night coffee, and soon, dating was the best part of my life. For 8 months, Kelly seemed to have put it all together, because she was suggesting coffee dates, making dinner together in her place or mine, and hitting up local pizza joints. She was attentive, agreeable, and generally the most fun I had had in my life. One day we were walking hand in hand through the mall. Her eyes turned to a jewelry store. "What pretty diamond rings," she said. "Pretty diamond rings?" I said. She looked at me firmly, and I just nodded. Hint was received. But then something happened. Literally the next day, Kelly called me and told me she had reconnected with some college friends. I thought that was fine. But that weekend she did something she hadn't done since we started dating. She went out to the bars with her friends. Bar hopping isn't my thing, but I went with them a couple times. Soon her social media was full of her in dresses I had never seen her in, staying out late. I had picked out a 1-carat diamond solitaire, princess cut, but then the next weekend her social media showed her dancing with men I didn't know. Things weren't going well when I saw her either. I was still taking her to diners and local restaurants, but she started complaining that our old haunts were too small. She wanted excitement, new experiences, she called it. And when I looked up the restaurants she talked about, the prices were eye-watering. Eventually, I committed to a restaurant called the Palmetto, and I thought that would be the moment I would propose. We had gotten there, but the reserved table wasn't ready yet. We were sitting at a bar, and this guy wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car and a watch that would be a year's worth of rent approached us. Kelly gave him the biggest smile I had seen in my life. They chatted about their work and the travel he had done. New York, Seattle, Miami. "That's so exciting," Kelly gushed. Even as I sat next to her, the guy, Brandon, apparently nodded at me. "Who's the guy at your arm?" "Oh, him," Kelly said, her voice not so interested. "That's Kevin. He's my," her eyes flicked to me, "roommate. We're just hanging out." My heart sank. They chatted a little more, obvious flirtation, hints about seeing each other going out. When he turned away, I opened my wallet, pulled out two $20 bills, excused myself, and then made for the door. When I was driving away, I texted her, "That's for the bar tab and for your ride home." There was silence, then a text. "What? You just left me here, Kevin?" I added a shrugging emoji, then added, "I'm sure Brandon will gladly take you home, yours or his." I let that one sink in. She didn't reach out for the rest of the night. The next morning, there was a social media post. "I went home alone last night. One of those times where a girl knows who has her back and who doesn't." That got under my skin. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I pulled out the engagement ring box, took a picture of it on my kitchen counter, and responded to that post with that image and just the words, "This was in my pocket last night." That seemed to have an effect. It went from lots of social media engagement to nothing. By that afternoon, there were 10 texts and her social media went silent. By the next day, one of her texts, none of which I responded to, said, "I just deleted my social media." I checked, and the links to her accounts brought up a page that said, "This account has been removed by the original owner." 2 more days went by. On the night of the third, there was a knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, which told me more than it should have. I opened the door, and there was Kelly. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was shaky. Her eyes were glassy. I wasn't thrilled to see her, but she looked like she might pass out. I brought her inside, sat her on the couch, and began taking care of her. I drew a glass of cool water. I loosened her shoes. I got an ice pack, wrapped it in a towel, and then put it on her head. Then I put a blanket over her lap and then started with a little food. First, it was just peanut butter crackers for calories, but then I found some bean soup in the pantry and then began prepping that on my stove. When I came out with the crackers, she had sipped her water. I took the glass from her hand, set down the plate of crackers, and then went back to get her more water. She was eating, but she was clearly a little spaced out. But after finishing the crackers, her eyes opened wider, and then she looked at me. "Why am I in your apartment, Kevin? You came over here, not looking very good. I've been trying to bring you around." I didn't want to take you to urgent care, but I was thinking about it. I heard the stove ping, and until a couple minutes later, I had a bowl of bean soup sitting in front of her. This should get some protein back in your system. I sat quietly while she looked at the bowl. When it cooled, she slowly ate it all. Then she drank the water again. When she was done, she put the ice pack back on her forehead. I'm sorry, she whispered, alert, but still looking weak. I know, I said. I hurt you, she admitted, and not just once. For weeks I've been hurting you. I see that now. I got so caught up in spending time with my friends that I just wasn't thinking about you at all. She grabbed my wrist. That's why I deleted my social media. That's why I blocked Brandon. She paused. That's why I cut off all those old friends, except for one. Lindy. She was trying to remind me how happy I seemed with you. She looked down. I have made a decision. If you're going to let me have a chance, I'm staying off social media. That ring box completely shattered everything I thought I was doing. She looked down. I even knew Brandon wasn't really worth it. He was just different. She grabbed my wrist. Is there any way we can start over? I don't remember coming here. I was so dazed that it feels more like fate than anything else. And now that I'm here, I don't ever want to leave again. I thought for a long time. Starting feels like the right way to put it. I can't just propose to you now, but if things feel right in the coming months, maybe. She nodded, gripping my wrist harder. Anything you want, Kevin. Just let me stay and prove to you that this is who I really am, and that I know how to be the best girl in the world for you. Her eyes bore into me, hopeful, firm. Okay, Kelly, I can give this another shot. She threw her arms around me, her grip firmer than I had ever felt in my life. I'm sorry, Kevin. I love you. We held each other late into the evening, letting the peace begin to fill us up once again.